She knelt beside the crumpled figure in the alley, her own empty stomach forgotten as she pressed her last clean shirt against his bleeding chest, whispering, "Stay with me, baby, stay with me." Not knowing that in saving his life, she was about to save her own. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The December rain turned the city streets into mirrors, reflecting neon signs and broken dreams with equal indifference. Grace Washington pulled her donated coat tighter as she navigated the maze of downtown alleys, her worn sneakers splashing through puddles that held more promise than her bank account. At 42, she'd learned to read the city's moods like scripture, and tonight it felt angry. She paused outside Morrison's diner, where the warm yellow light spilled onto the sidewalk like honey. Through the window, she watched families sharing meals, their laughter muffled by glass and circumstance. Her stomach clenched, not just from hunger, but from the familiar ache of being on the outside looking in. "You coming in or just window shopping?" called Jimmy, the night cook, as he stepped out for a smoke break. His tone wasn't cruel, just tired. They both knew she couldn't afford what was inside. "Just passing through," Grace replied, forcing a smile that had gotten her through worse nights than this. She'd mastered the art of disappearing in plain sight, a necessary skill when the world preferred not to see you. As she walked away, her fingers instinctively touched the small cross pendant at her throat, the only thing left from her mother. "Keep moving, Gracie," she whispered to herself. "Keep breathing. Tomorrow might be different." 15 blocks uptown, Harry Rhodes stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 42nd floor, watching the same rain paint abstract patterns on the glass. At 58, he commanded a billion-dollar empire from this ivory tower, but tonight the city below looked like a stranger's dream. His reflection stared back, expensive suit, tired eyes, the weight of success carved into the lines around his mouth. The Forbes article on his desk called him a visionary philanthropist, but Harry knew the truth. Every charitable donation was calculated, every public appearance strategically planned. He'd built walls so high around his heart that sometimes he forgot there was anything left inside them. His phone buzzed. Another text from his daughter Emma in California. "Dad, when was the last time we just talked? Not about business or money or achievements. Just talked." He set the phone aside without responding. What could he tell her? That success had been his cocaine, achievement his alcohol, and now he was overdosing on emptiness? That he'd climbed so high he'd forgotten how to come back down? The intercom crackled. "Mr. Rhodes, your car is waiting downstairs." Harry gathered his briefcase, straightened his tie, and prepared to descend into the night. Another dinner meeting, another deal to close, another step further from the man he used to be. He didn't know that in exactly 17 minutes, his carefully constructed world would collide with Grace's in an alley that smelled of rain and desperation, and that collision would change everything. The elevator descended through floors of ambition and aspiration, carrying him toward a destiny written in the stars he could no longer see through his office windows. Outside, Grace turned into Meridian Alley, following the shortcut that would put her on a collision course with Grace itself. Neither of them believed in fate. By morning, they'd have no choice. The heart attack hit Harry Rhodes like a sledgehammer to the chest as he stepped out of his black Mercedes onto the rain-slicked pavement. One moment he was checking his Rolex, calculating how fashionably late he could be to the acquisition dinner. The next he was gasping, clawing at his silk tie as fire spread through his left arm. "Sir? Mr. Rhodes?" His driver, Peterson, was suddenly beside him, but his voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. Harry stumbled, his Italian leather shoes losing purchase on the wet concrete. The briefcase fell from his grip, spilling contracts worth millions into the gutter, where they dissolved like confetti in the rain. He lurched toward the nearest alley, Meridian Alley, seeking something, anything to lean against as his vision blurred and his legs gave way. The last thing he heard before hitting the ground was Peterson shouting into his phone. "Call 911. Now!" Grace had been looking for aluminum cans in the dumpster behind Chen's Electronics when she heard the commotion. She'd learned to ignore most street noise, sirens, shouting, the general symphony of urban chaos. But something about the panic in that voice made her pause. She emerged from behind the dumpster, just as a well-dressed man collapsed against the brick wall, sliding down like a marionette with cut strings. His face was grey, lips blue, one hand clutched to his chest while the other reached toward nothing at all. For a heartbeat, Grace hesitated. She'd been invisible for so long that intervening felt like breaking some unspoken rule. But then the man's eyes found hers, desperate, terrified, human, and something deep in her chest cracked open. "Hey, hey," she whispered, rushing to his side. Her knees hit the wet concrete as she knelt beside him, her hands instinctively going to his shoulders. "Stay with me, okay? What's your name?" Harry tried to speak, but only a wheeze came out. The pain was crushing now, radiating from his chest down his arm and up into his jaw. Through the haze of agony, he saw her, a black woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, wearing clothes that had seen better years, but a face that held more compassion than he'd seen in boardrooms full of suits. "Heart attack," he managed to gasp. "I know, baby. I know." Grace's voice was steady, soothing, even as her mind raced. She'd seen her father die this same way when she was 17. The same grey pallor, the same desperate reaching for air that wasn't there. But she'd been helpless then. Not now. She pulled off her cleanest shirt, a faded blue cotton top that Jimmy from the diner had given her last week, and pressed it against what looked like a scrape on Harry's forehead from his fall. With her free hand, she loosened his tie, then his collar, talking to him the whole time. "My name's Grace. Grace Washington. And you're going to be fine. You hear me? The ambulance is coming. I can hear the sirens, but until they get here, you're not alone." Harry's breathing was shallow, erratic. Each breath felt like his last, but her voice was an anchor in the storm. He focused on her face, the way raindrops clung to her dark skin, the small scar above her left eyebrow, the cross pendant that caught the streetlight as she leaned over him. "Grace," he whispered, and the name felt like a prayer. "That's right. And what's your name?" He wanted to say Harry Rhodes, CEO of Rhodes Enterprises, worth $2.3 billion. But what came out was just, Harry. "Okay, Harry. I need you to breathe with me, okay? In and out. That's good. You're doing so good." The sirens were getting closer now, but Grace didn't look away from his eyes. She'd positioned herself so that her body blocked the worst of the rain from hitting his face, and Harry realized that this stranger, this woman society had taught him not to see, was giving him her warmth, her shirt, her presence, asking nothing in return. "Why?" he managed to gasp. Grace paused in her gentle ministrations, her hands still steady on his chest, feeling for his heartbeat. "Why what, honey? Why are you helping me?" For a moment, the question hung between them like the rain itself. Heavy, essential, washing something clean. Grace looked at this man in his expensive suit, his gold watch catching the ambulance lights that were finally turning into the alley, and she saw not a stranger, but a soul in pain. "Because you're here," she said simply. "And so am I. And maybe that's enough." The ambulance screeched to a halt, and suddenly the alley was full of voices and movement. Paramedics rushed toward them with equipment and urgent questions, but for just a moment longer, it was still just Grace and Harry in their bubble of unexpected grace. As the EMTs took over, Grace started to back away, to fade into the shadows where she belonged. But Harry's hand shot out, catching her wrist with surprising strength. "Don't go," he whispered, and in his voice was a vulnerability that no boardroom had ever heard. "Please, don't go." Grace looked at his fingers around her wrist, soft, uncalloused, the hands of a man who'd never known physical labor, holding on to her like she was the only solid thing in a world that was crumbling. "I'll ride with you," she said, and meant it. "If they'll let me." As they loaded Harry onto the stretcher, he kept his eyes on Grace's face, memorizing it like a map to somewhere he'd never been, but desperately needed to go. The rain was still falling, but something had shifted in the universe, something that would ripple outward from this moment in ways neither of them could imagine. The ambulance doors closed on the two of them, strangers no longer, bound by something deeper than circumstance and more lasting than rain. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital emergency room buzzed with the persistence of angry wasps. Grace sat in a plastic chair that had seen better decades, her arms wrapped around herself where her shirt used to be. The thin hospital blanket someone had draped over her shoulders smelled of industrial detergent and other people's emergencies. She shouldn't be here. Every fiber of her being screamed that she didn't belong in this sterile world of insurance cards and next-of-kin forms. But every time she tried to leave, she remembered Harry's hand on her wrist, the desperate plea in his voice. "Don't go." "Ma'am." A young nurse with tired eyes approached, clipboard in hand. "Are you family?" The question hit Grace like a physical blow. Family. When was the last time anyone had asked if she belonged to someone? Somewhere? "No, I just helped him. In the alley." The nurse's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, not unkind, but distant. "Professional. I'm sorry, but visiting is restricted to family members only. There's a McDonald's down the street if you need somewhere warm to wait." Grace nodded, understanding the dismissal for what it was. She was being sorted back into her proper category. Stranger, outsider, someone who'd served her purpose and could now be gently shuffled aside. She stood slowly, her joints stiff from the adrenaline crash. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked. "The doctors are with him now," the nurse replied, which wasn't an answer at all. Grace walked toward the exit, each step feeling like a betrayal. But what had she expected? That saving someone's life would somehow change her own? That 30 minutes of mattering would erase 42 years of not? The automatic doors exhaled her back into the night, and she pulled the hospital blanket tighter. The rain had stopped, but the city felt colder somehow, more distant. She'd allowed herself to hope for a moment. Actually hope. And now she felt foolish for thinking that anything could be different. 3 floors above, Harry Rhodes lay in a private room, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision. His chest ached, but not just from the heart attack. Every breath reminded him of Grace's voice. "Stay with me, baby. Stay with me." His assistant, Patricia, bustled around the room with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing crises. "The cardiologist says you're stable, but they want to keep you for observation. I've rescheduled all your meetings for the next 2 weeks, and I've prepared a statement for the press about your brief hospitalization for exhaustion." Harry barely heard her. His mind was still in that alley, still feeling Grace's hands on his chest, still seeing the way she'd looked at him. Not as Harry Rhodes the billionaire, but as Harry the human being who needed help. "Sir," Patricia's voice cut through his reverie. "The Yamamoto deal? Should I move forward with the merger papers?" "Where is she?" Harry asked. Patricia blinked. She? Sir, if you're asking about Ms. Yamamoto, she's in Tokyo. The time difference. No. The woman. Grace. The woman who helped me. Patricia consulted her tablet, scrolling through what looked like a detailed report. According to the paramedics' notes, a Good Samaritan assisted at the scene, but they didn't take down any contact information. Is this relevant to something business-related? Harry stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the holes in the acoustic panels. How could he explain that in those moments when he thought he was dying, the only thing that felt real was a stranger's kindness? How could he tell Patricia, who'd worked for him for 8 years, that he'd felt more human in an alley with a homeless woman than he had in decades of corporate success? Never mind, he said finally. It's not important. But even as he said it, he knew he was lying. Grace Washington was the most important thing that had happened to him in years, and he'd just let her disappear into the night like she'd never existed at all. Dr. Martinez entered the room with the brisk confidence of someone who delivered life-altering news for a living. Mr. Rhodes, good news. The angioplasty went well, and we've got you stabilized. You'll need to make some lifestyle changes, diet, exercise, stress management, but you should make a full recovery. Harry nodded absently. Doctor, there was a woman with me when the paramedics arrived. A black woman, about 40, named Grace. Do you know what happened to her? Dr. Martinez frowned, checking his chart. I'm sorry, I don't have any information about that. Our focus was entirely on getting you the care you needed. Is she a relative? We could try to contact. No, Harry said quickly. She's not. We're not related. The silence that followed felt heavy with implications. Dr. Martinez cleared his throat. Well, if she was just a bystander who helped, she probably went home once she knew you were in good hands. That's usually how these things go. Home. Harry wondered what home meant to Grace Washington. Did she have a place to go? People who worried about her? Or was she out there somewhere in the cold, wearing someone else's hospital blanket because she'd given her shirt to a stranger? Patricia was already back to business. Sir, your daughter called. She's flying in from California tomorrow. I told her you were fine, just some chest pains, nothing serious. Emma. His daughter who'd stopped calling him Dad and started calling him Harry sometime after her mother's funeral 5 years ago. The daughter who'd inherited his stubbornness, but none of his emotional walls, who saw right through his carefully constructed facade to the hollow man underneath. You don't have to come, he'd told her during their last phone call. I'm fine. That's the problem, Dad, she'd replied. You're always fine. Even when you're not. Now, lying in this hospital bed with Grace Washington's voice still echoing in his ears, Harry wondered if Emma had been right all along. If being fine had cost him everything that mattered. Outside, Grace Washington walked the empty streets, telling herself she'd done the right thing. She'd helped someone who needed help. That was enough. It had to be enough. But her fingers kept touching her throat where her shirt collar used to be, and she couldn't shake the feeling that in walking away from that hospital, she'd left part of herself behind. Neither of them slept that night. Harry in his private room surrounded by flowers he didn't want, Grace in the shelter downtown surrounded by strangers she didn't know. Both of them were trying to convince themselves that what happened in that alley was just a moment, nothing more. Both of them were failing. 3 days later, Grace stood outside the imposing glass towers of Rhodes Enterprises, clutching a manila envelope that contained everything she owned of value, which wasn't much. Her birth certificate, her high school diploma, a faded photograph of her parents, and folded carefully at the bottom, Harry's silk tie. She'd tried to return it twice already. The first time, the security guard had looked at her like she was planning to rob the place. The second time, A different guard had taken the tie, but assured her it would find its way to the appropriate department, which Grace translated as the garbage can. But the tie wasn't just fabric, it was evidence. Proof that what happened in that alley was real, that for 17 minutes, she had mattered to someone who mattered to the world. "Can I help you?" The receptionist's voice was polite but strained, the way people spoke when they were trying very hard to be professional about an uncomfortable situation. "I need to return something to Mr. Rhodes," Grace said, pulling the tie from her envelope. "He dropped this when he collapsed. I was the one who helped him." The receptionist, her nameplate read Jennifer, looked at the expensive silk tie, then at Grace's worn clothing, then back at the tie. Her expression suggested she was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. "I see," Jennifer said carefully. "And your name is?" "Grace Washington." Jennifer typed something into her computer, frowned, typed some more. "I'm sorry, but I don't see your name on Mr. Rhodes' appointment calendar or visitor list. Perhaps if you left the item with me, I could make sure." "No." The word came out sharper than Grace intended. She'd played this game before, being shuffled aside, dismissed, made invisible by people who thought they were being kind. "I need to give it to him personally." Jennifer's smile became more strained. "Ms. Washington, I understand, but Mr. Rhodes has been dealing with some health issues this week, and his schedule is extremely limited. Perhaps if you told me what this is regarding." "It's regarding the fact that I kept him alive until the paramedics arrived," Grace said quietly, and something in her voice made Jennifer stop typing. Before Jennifer could respond, the elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and Patricia emerged, her arms full of file folders and her phone pressed to her ear. "Tell the Yamamoto people we'll have to push the meeting to next week. Mr. Rhodes is still—" She stopped mid-sentence when she saw Grace standing at the reception desk. There was a moment of recognition, then confusion. Patricia ended her call and approached slowly, like someone trying not to startle a wild animal. "You're the woman from the hospital," Patricia said. It wasn't a question. "Grace Washington," Grace replied, lifting her chin slightly. "I was returning this." She held up the tie. Patricia stared at the tie, then at Grace, then seemed to come to some internal decision. "Mr. Rhodes has been asking about you." Jennifer looked between them, like she was watching a tennis match she didn't understand. Grace felt something flutter in her chest. Hope, maybe, or terror. Possibly both. "He has." "Every day," Patricia admitted, lowering her voice. "He's been different since the incident. Distracted. He keeps asking if anyone's tried to contact him about what happened in the alley." Grace's grip tightened on the envelope. "I just wanted to return his tie. I wasn't trying to contact him for. I don't want anything." The words hung in the air, and Grace realized how they must sound. A homeless woman in the lobby of a billion-dollar corporation, claiming she wanted nothing. Who would believe that? But Patricia surprised her. "I know," she said gently. "The paramedic report mentioned you rode with him to the hospital, that you wouldn't leave until you knew he was stable. Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," Patricia said, and there was something sad in her voice. "They really wouldn't have." She glanced around the lobby, seeming to weigh her options. "He's in a board meeting right now, but would you be willing to wait? I could arrange for you to see him when he's finished." Grace looked around the marble lobby with its crystal chandeliers and original artwork. Everything here cost more than she'd make in a lifetime, if she'd been making anything at all. She didn't belong here. This world of leather chairs and Persian rugs and people in $1,000 suits wasn't meant for someone like her. But Harry's voice echoed in her memory. "Don't go. Please. Don't go." "I'll wait," she said. Patricia nodded and led her to a seating area near the windows. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? Water would be nice, Grace said, settling into a chair that was probably worth more than most people's cars. As Patricia walked away, Grace caught her reflection in the window. She looked small and out of place, like a sparrow that had wandered into a jewelry store. But she also looked determined. Whatever had started in that alley wasn't finished yet. 42 floors above, Harry Rhodes sat at the head of a conference table, half listening to quarterly projections while his mind wandered to rain-soaked alleys and kind eyes. The Yamamoto merger that Patricia kept mentioning felt like something happening to someone else. Numbers on spreadsheets, profit margins, market shares, none of it seemed real anymore. What felt real was Grace Washington's voice, saying, "Stay with me, baby." What felt real was the way she'd looked at him like he was worth saving, not because of his bank account or his business empire, but because he was human and he was hurting. His phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "She's here." Harry's heart rate spiked. Not the dangerous kind from 3 days ago, but something else entirely. Something that felt like possibility. He stood abruptly, interrupting a presentation about market penetration in Southeast Asia. "Gentlemen, I need to step out for a moment. Patricia will handle any questions." The board members exchanged glances as Harry left the room. In 30 years of business, he'd never walked out of a meeting. But then again, in 30 years of business, he'd never met anyone like Grace Washington. The elevator ride to the lobby felt like the longest 17 seconds of his life. When the doors opened, he saw her immediately, sitting by the windows, looking out at the city like she was trying to memorize it. She was still wearing the hospital blanket over her shoulders like a shawl. Their eyes met across the marble expanse, and for a moment, Harry forgot how to breathe. Not from a heart attack this time, but from something far more dangerous. Hope. Grace stood slowly, the manila envelope clutched in her hands, and Harry realized that whatever happened next would change both of their lives forever. Neither of them was ready for it. Both of them desperately needed it. The executive conference room felt different with Grace Washington in it. The mahogany table that had witnessed billion-dollar deals and corporate takeovers now seemed to shrink around this woman in her donated clothes and hospital blanket, as if the room itself was recalibrating to accommodate something it had never held before: genuine human connection. Harry had insisted they talk privately, away from the lobby's curious stares and Patricia's protective hovering. Now, sitting across from Grace with his silk tie laid between them like evidence of a crime neither had committed, he found himself at a loss for words. "You came back," he said finally. "I don't like owing people," Grace replied, but her voice was softer than her words. "This belongs to you." Harry looked at the tie, Italian silk, probably worth more than most people spent on groceries in a month, and felt a strange disconnect from the man who'd put it on 3 days ago. That man had cared about things like appearances and power lunches. This man cared about why Grace Washington's eyes looked so tired. "Keep it," he said. "I have dozens." Grace's laugh was short, bitter. "What am I going to do with a tie like this?" "Wear it to my next job interview at the gas station." The words hung between them, heavy with implications. Harry realized how little he knew about the woman who'd saved his life, and how much he wanted to know. "Grace," he said carefully, "can I ask, how did you end up on the streets?" For a moment, her face went completely still. Harry had seen that look before. In mirrors, when people asked questions that cut too close to bones he'd rather keep buried. But then something shifted in her expression, like a door opening just a crack. "Same way most people do," she said. "One disaster at a time." She was quiet for so long that Harry thought she wouldn't continue. Then, without looking at him, she began to speak. I used to be a nurse. 20 years at Metropolitan General. Had a little apartment in Riverside, nothing fancy, but it was mine. Had a man I loved, Jerome, and we were talking about getting married, maybe having kids. Her fingers traced patterns on the mahogany table. Then my mama got sick. Alzheimer's. Real bad, real fast. Harry listened without interrupting, sensing that these words had been locked away for a long time. Insurance wouldn't cover the kind of care she needed, and I couldn't put her in one of those state places where they just warehouse people until they die. So I took out a loan against the apartment. Then another loan. Then I started missing work to take care of her, and eventually, she shrugged. Eventually, I lost everything. The apartment, the job, Jerome. Turns out love has limits when it comes to watching someone else's world fall apart. When did she pass? Harry asked gently. 3 years ago. By then, I was already on the streets. Used up all my favors. Burned through what little family I had left. Turns out it's a lot easier to fall than it is to climb back up. She finally looked at him. Especially when you're a middle-aged black woman with a gap in your employment history and no fixed address. Harry felt something crack open in his chest. Not physically this time, but emotionally. He'd spent decades building walls between himself and other people's pain, telling himself that philanthropy was enough, that writing checks to charities absolved him from having to witness suffering up close. But Grace's story wasn't happening at a comfortable distance. It was here, in his conference room, looking at him with eyes that held no self-pity, only truth. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "Don't be sorry," Grace said firmly. "Be aware. There's a difference." The rebuke was gentle but clear, and Harry found himself respecting her even more for it. She wasn't asking for his pity. She was asking him to see her, really see her, as more than just her circumstances. "What about you?" Grace asked, surprising him. "What's your story? And don't tell me it's the rags to riches thing from the magazines. I want to know what put that look in your eyes." "What look?" "The look of a man who has everything except the thing he actually needs." Harry leaned back in his leather chair, struck by how easily she'd seen through him. CEOs and board members had sat in this same room for years without noticing that he was slowly disappearing behind his success. "I built this company from nothing," he said slowly. "Started in my garage with $15,000 and a dream. Worked 18-hour days for 15 years. Missed birthdays and anniversaries and school plays because the business always came first. I told myself I was doing it for my family, for my wife Catherine and my daughter Emma. But really, I was doing it for me. For the high of winning, of being the smartest guy in the room." His voice grew quieter. "Catherine died 5 years ago. Cancer. And I realized that while I was building an empire, she was slipping away, and I was too busy to notice until it was too late. Emma tried to tell me. She begged me to spend more time with her mother, to be present instead of just available. But I thought providing was the same thing as loving." Grace was watching him with the same intensity she'd shown in the alley, as if his life depended on her attention. "In a way, maybe it did. Emma hasn't forgiven me," Harry continued. "She shouldn't. I had 10 years to show Catherine I loved her more than my company, and I failed. Now Emma lives in California and calls me Harry instead of Dad, and I don't blame her. I turned myself into a stranger in my own family. Is that why you asked me not to go? In the ambulance?" Grace's voice was barely a whisper. Harry met her eyes. "I asked you not to go because in 30 minutes, you saw me more clearly than people I've known for decades. When you looked at me, you didn't see Harry Rhodes, billionaire CEO. You saw Harry, the man who was scared and dying and desperately grateful that someone cared enough to stay." Silence filled the room, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who'd shown each other their scars and found that they matched in ways that defied logic. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" Grace said finally. "The homeless woman and the lonely billionaire." "Grace," Harry said, leaning forward, "I want to help you. Not as charity, not as some tax write-off, but because you saved my life and I want to save yours." Grace's expression hardened slightly. "I don't need saving, Harry. I need opportunities." The correction was important, and Harry filed it away. "Then let me give you opportunities. I have a company with 15,000 employees. There has to be something." "I'm not taking a job because you feel guilty," Grace interrupted. "What if I'm offering it because you're qualified?" Harry shot back. "You were a nurse for 20 years. I have a corporate wellness program that's never had proper medical oversight. I have employees who are stressed, overworked, dealing with exactly the kind of problems that lead to heart attacks in alleyways." Grace stared at him, and Harry could see her mind working. "You're serious?" "I'm serious. Not as charity. As necessity. I need someone who understands that wellness isn't just about gym memberships and health screenings. I need someone who understands that sometimes the most important thing you can do for another human being is simply stay with them." For the first time since he'd known her, Grace Washington smiled, really smiled, and Harry felt something shift in the universe. Something that felt like possibility. Something that felt like hope. Something that felt dangerously close to redemption. 2 weeks later, Grace Washington sat in what used to be a storage closet on the 38th floor of Rhodes Enterprises, which Harry had converted into a temporary office while the corporate wellness center was being built. The space was small but hers, the first place she could call her own in 3 years. She'd started slowly, cautiously. Harry had insisted on paying for a small apartment nearby. "It's a business expense," he'd said when she protested. "I can't have my wellness director living in a shelter." And Grace had accepted only after negotiating to pay him back once she was on her feet. The apartment was tiny, just a studio with a Murphy bed and a kitchenette, but it had a door she could lock and windows that let in morning light. Now she was reviewing employee health assessments, and the patterns were troubling. High stress levels, poor work-life balance, emotional exhaustion. The very problems that had led to Harry's heart attack were epidemic throughout his company. She was making notes when someone knocked on her door. "Come in," she called, expecting Patricia with more forms to review. Instead, Harry poked his head in, looking almost shy. "Am I interrupting?" "Just reading about how your employees are all slowly killing themselves with stress," Grace said, gesturing to the files spread across her desk. "Busy day destroying your workforce?" Harry winced. "That bad? Worse. When's the last time you took a vacation, Harry?" "I don't really do vacations." "When's the last time you ate lunch away from your desk?" "I eat lunch at my desk because it's efficient." "When's the last time you went home before 8 p.m.? Harry was quiet for a moment. "I see your point." Grace leaned back in her chair, studying him. Over the past 2 weeks, she'd watched him work, and it was like watching someone slowly drown in success. He arrived before dawn, left after dark, and filled every moment between with meetings, calls, and decisions that probably didn't need his personal attention. "You know what I think?" she said. "What?" "I think you're afraid to stop moving, because if you do, you might have to feel something." The observation hit its mark. Harry's face went carefully neutral. The expression he wore in board meetings when someone had found a weakness he didn't want to admit. "Maybe," he said quietly. Grace stood and walked around her desk to lean against the front of it, closer to him, but not crowding. "You want to know what I learned living on the streets?" "What?" "That you can't outrun your pain. Trust me, I tried. I walked miles every day, kept moving, Told myself I was looking for work or food or shelter, but really I was just trying to stay ahead of the hurt. Didn't work. Pain's got longer legs than any of us do. Harry was looking at her with an expression she'd started to recognize. The way he looked when she said something that cut through his carefully constructed defenses. So what did you do? I stopped running. Sat down on a bench in Morrison Park one day and just let it catch me. Cried for about 3 hours straight. Ugly crying. The kind that makes people cross the street to avoid you. She smiled slightly. But when I was done, I could breathe again. First time in months. And then I got up and figured out how to survive. But I stopped pretending I wasn't broken. Made everything else a lot clearer. Harry moved closer, and Grace noticed he wasn't wearing a tie today. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and there were tired lines around his eyes that made him look more human, less corporate. "Grace," he said, "can I ask you something personal?" "Shoot. What's it like to lose everything?" The question surprised her with its directness. "You mean practically or emotionally?" "Both, I guess." Grace considered this. "Practically, it's a lot of problem solving. Where to sleep, where to get food, where to use a bathroom, where to be safe. You develop routines, learn which shelters have beds available on which nights, which restaurants throw away the best leftovers, which cops will move you along nicely, and which ones will make it a problem." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Emotionally, it's like being erased. People look right through you. You start to wonder if you actually exist, or if you're just imagining that you do. The hardest part isn't being hungry or cold. It's being invisible." Harry absorbed this silently. Then he asked, "Do you regret it? Any of it? Taking care of your mother, I mean. Losing everything for her?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "She gave me life. I gave her dignity at the end of hers. That's not a trade I regret. Even though it cost you everything?" Grace smiled, and there was something fierce in it. "Harry, you think I lost everything? I learned what I was made of. I learned I could survive anything. I learned that kindness isn't a luxury. It's a choice you make every single day, whether you have money or not. And I learned that sometimes, when you think you have nothing left to give, you discover you have exactly what someone else needs to survive." She meant the comment generally, but Harry heard it personally. His throat felt tight. Is that what happened? In the alley? Maybe. Or maybe it was just two broken people finding each other at exactly the right moment. They were standing close now, close enough that Grace could see the flecks of grey in Harry's brown eyes, close enough that he could see the small scar above her eyebrow, where someone had thrown a bottle at her outside a shelter 6 months ago. Neither of them moved away. "Grace," Harry said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I haven't felt this present in years. Since Catherine died, maybe longer. I go through the motions, make the decisions, sign the papers, but I haven't actually been here for any of it. But with you I am. I don't know why." Grace felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "Because I see you, Harry. Not your money or your company or your reputation. Just you. The man who was scared in an alley and grateful that someone stayed. The man who let his wife die alone while he was in a board meeting," Harry said, the words coming out like a confession. "The man who's trying to do better now," Grace corrected gently. Harry looked at her, really looked at her, and Grace felt seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Not as a charity case or a good deed or a problem to be solved, but as a woman, as an equal, as someone whose presence made his world better just by being in it. "Grace," he said, and her name sounded different in his voice now. Softer, more precious. "Yeah, thank you." "For what?" "For staying. Then and now." Grace reached out and very gently touched his hand. His skin was soft, uncalloused, but his grip was strong when his fingers closed around hers. "Thank you for asking me to," she said. They stood like that for a long moment, two people who'd found each other across an impossible divide, holding hands in a converted storage closet that felt, suddenly, like the most important room in the world. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos, but inside this small space, something quiet and precious was taking root. Something that felt like healing. Something that felt like home. Have you ever had someone see the real you when you thought you were invisible? Or been the person who chose to truly see someone else when the world overlooked them? Share your story below. Sometimes the most powerful healing happens when two broken people find each other. The article appeared on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks into what Harry had started thinking of as the grace period. The first time in years when he looked forward to going to work, when the building felt less like a corporate fortress and more like a place where something meaningful was happening. Patricia burst into his office without knocking, her face pale, a tablet clutched in her hands like evidence of a crime. "Sir, we have a problem." Harry looked up from the employee wellness proposals Grace had submitted, innovative programs that treated workers like human beings instead of productivity units. "What kind of problem?" Patricia set the tablet on his desk, and Harry felt his world tilt off its axis. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Homeless Woman Cons Billionaire CEO." The real story behind Harry Rhodes' mystery employee. Below it was a photo, Grace, taken with a long lens, walking into the Rhodes building. But the woman in the picture looked different somehow, smaller, more desperate than the Grace he knew. The angle, the lighting, the timing, everything about it was designed to make her look like what she'd once been rather than who she was becoming. Harry's hands shook as he read. Sources close to Rhodes Enterprises confirm that Harry Rhodes, CEO of the billion-dollar conglomerate, has hired a homeless woman who helped him during a medical emergency 3 months ago. Grace Washington, 42, has been living on the streets for over 3 years and has no verifiable employment history since losing her nursing license due to a patient care incident. "That's not true," Harry said immediately. "She lost her job because she was caring for her mother, not because of patient care." "It gets worse," Patricia said grimly. Harry kept reading, each paragraph feeling like a physical blow. Employees report that Washington has been given special treatment, including a private office and above-market salary, despite lacking qualifications for her position. "It's obvious she's taking advantage of his guilt," said one anonymous source. "The whole thing is embarrassing for the company." Financial records suggest Rhodes may have also provided Washington with housing and other benefits, raising questions about the nature of their relationship and whether company funds are being misappropriated. The article went on, twisting every act of kindness Harry had shown into evidence of manipulation, every professional courtesy into proof of impropriety. By the time he finished reading, his chest felt tight, not with heart trouble this time, but with rage. "Who leaked this?" he demanded. Patricia looked uncomfortable. "The reporter won't reveal sources, but based on the level of detail about internal company matters." "It was someone on the board," Harry finished. "Someone who had access to payroll information and employee feedback." "Sir, we need to consider damage control. The stock is already down 3% in pre-market trading, and I've had 7 reporters call in the last hour asking for comment." Harry stood and walked to his window, looking down at the street where Grace had saved his life. The irony wasn't lost on him. The woman who'd given him back his humanity was now being crucified for it in the court of public opinion. His phone buzzed with a text from his daughter Emma. "Dad, I just saw the news. Is this real? Are you okay?" Then another from his golf partner. "Harry, what the hell is this about?" Call me. And another from a board member. We need to discuss this situation immediately. Sir. Patricia was watching him with the careful expression of someone waiting for orders. What do you want me to do? Harry closed his eyes, and for a moment he was back in that alley, Grace's voice cutting through the pain. Stay with me, baby. Stay with me. But now, instead of comfort, the memory felt like an accusation. She'd stayed with him. Was he about to abandon her? Schedule an emergency board meeting, he heard himself say, and draft a statement distancing the company from any personal relationship between Ms. Washington and myself. The words felt like ash in his mouth, but they were the smart play, the safe play, the kind of calculated move that had built his empire and protected his shareholders. Patricia nodded and headed for the door, but paused at the threshold. Sir? For what it's worth, I've watched Ms. Washington work these past few weeks. She's good at her job. Really good. The employee wellness metrics have improved more in 3 weeks than they did in the previous 3 years. After Patricia left, Harry sat in his office and stared at the article. He tried to see Grace the way the reporter had painted her, a manipulative woman taking advantage of his guilt and vulnerability. But all he could see was the person who'd held his hand in a converted storage closet, who'd looked at him like he was worth saving when he couldn't see any worth in himself. His phone rang. Emma. Dad, please tell me this isn't what it looks like. Emma, it's complicated. Is it? Because from here, it looks like you found someone who actually cares about you as a human being, and now you're going to throw her away to protect your precious company. The accusation hit like a slap. That's not what's happening, isn't it? God, Dad, do you even hear yourself? This is exactly what you did to Mom. Chose the company over the people who actually mattered. Your mother was different. No, she wasn't. She was another person who loved you despite yourself, and you chose your reputation over her too. The only difference is this time, I'm watching you do it in real time. Emma hung up, leaving Harry alone with the echo of her words and the weight of his choices. Meanwhile, 38 floors below, Grace sat in her small office, staring at her computer screen where the same article glowed like an indictment. She'd found it the way she found most news about herself these days, through the cruel mathematics of Google alerts and social media mentions. Every word was designed to cut, to reduce her to a stereotype, to erase the person she'd worked so hard to become and replace her with the person she'd once been at her lowest point. The anonymous quotes were the worst. Colleagues she'd started to trust, people she'd thought were beginning to see her as more than her circumstances. Her phone rang. It was Harry. Grace, I need to see you. In my office. Now. His voice was different, formal, distant. The voice of Harry Rhodes, CEO. Not Harry, the man who'd held her hand and talked about pain with longer legs than any of them. Grace looked around her small office, at the employee wellness plans spread across her desk, at the thank you notes from workers who'd attended her stress management workshops, at the small plant Harry had brought her last week because every office needs something alive in it. She'd known this moment would come, had been waiting for it really, because people like her didn't get to keep good things. The universe had rules about that. She walked to the elevator on unsteady legs, each floor passing like a countdown to the end of something she'd barely allowed herself to believe was real. When she entered Harry's office, he was standing at his window with his back to her, his shoulders rigid with tension. He didn't turn around when she came in. Harry, she said quietly. When he finally faced her, his expression was carefully neutral. The face he wore in board meetings, not the face of the man who'd thanked her for staying. Grace, he said, and even her name sounded different now. Corporate. Distant. We need to talk. The silence in Harry's office stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest touch. Grace stood in the middle of the Persian rug, her hands clasped in front of her, waiting for the words that would send her back to invisibility. "I've seen the article," she said finally, saving him the trouble of explaining. Harry's jaw tightened. "Grace, I want you to know that I don't believe a word of it. Not about you manipulating me, not about you taking advantage. But you're going to let me go anyway." It wasn't a question. Harry turned back to the window, unable to look at her. "The board is meeting in an hour. The stock price is dropping. There are reporters calling, shareholders asking questions. If I don't do something to contain this, you'll lose everything you've built," Grace finished. "I understand. Do you?" Harry spun around, and for a moment his corporate mask slipped, showing the anguish underneath. "Do you understand that if I don't protect the company, 15,000 people lose their jobs? Do you understand that everything I've worked for my entire life could disappear because some reporter decided to make you into a villain?" Grace absorbed the blow without flinching. "And do you understand that those same 15,000 people have been slowly killing themselves with stress and overwork because nobody cared enough to see them as human beings instead of productivity units? Do you understand that in 3 weeks, I've probably prevented more heart attacks like yours than all your corporate wellness initiatives combined?" "That's not the point." "That's exactly the point." Grace's voice rose for the first time since he'd known her. "You're about to throw away something real, something that was actually making a difference, because you're scared of what people might think." Harry's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I'm not scared. I'm being practical. I'm being responsible. You're being a coward." The word hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Harry felt it hit his chest like a physical blow, all the more painful because he recognized the truth in it. "I am not." "Yes, you are." Grace stepped closer, and he could see tears gathering in her eyes, though her voice remained steady. "You're terrified that if you choose me, choose us, over your company's reputation, people might think you're human. Might think you actually care about something more than quarterly profits and board approval. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You're just making it complicated because simple would require you to be brave." Harry felt something crack inside his chest. Not physically this time, but emotionally. All the walls he'd built, all the careful distance he'd maintained between himself and anything that could hurt him, were crumbling under the weight of her honesty. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I lived in a cardboard box for 2 months, Harry. Don't tell me about pressure." The rebuke was gentle but devastating. Grace moved closer still, close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders held the weight of yet another disappointment. "I'm not asking you to choose me over your company," she said quietly. "I'm asking you to choose the truth over fear. To choose the man who held my hand in a storage closet over the CEO who's afraid of what the Wall Street Journal might say." Harry's throat felt raw. "What if I choose wrong? What if I lose everything? What if you choose right and find something worth more than everything you thought you had?" Grace reached out then, very slowly, and touched his cheek. Her fingers were warm against his skin, and Harry closed his eyes, leaning into the contact like a man dying of thirst. "That woman in the article," Grace said softly, "that desperate, manipulative person they painted, she doesn't exist. She never existed. But the man who asked me not to go, who saw me as worth saving when I couldn't see it myself, who gave me a chance to matter again, he's real. And he's standing right here, trying to decide who he wants to be." Harry opened his eyes and found himself looking directly into hers. No masks, no pretense. Just 2 people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and somehow made something beautiful. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't know how to choose my heart over my head. Yes, you do, Grace said. You did it in the alley when you trusted a stranger to keep you alive. You did it when you offered me a job. You did it every time you walked down to my office just to talk, not because you had to, but because you wanted to. She was right, and they both knew it. For weeks, Harry had been making choices with his heart, small ones that had added up to something larger. The question now was whether he was brave enough to make the big one. His phone buzzed. Patricia. Sir, the board members are arriving. They're asking if Ms. Washington will be joining the meeting. Harry looked at the text, then at Grace, then at the woman who'd saved his life in more ways than one. Grace, he said slowly, what would you say if I asked you to come with me to face the board? Not as my employee, but as my partner in this wellness initiative. As the woman who's probably prevented more workplace disasters in 3 weeks than they've prevented in 3 years. Grace studied his face, searching for something. I'd say that depends on why you're asking. Are you asking because you think it's good PR, or because you believe in what we've built together? Harry took her hands in his, and his voice was steady when he answered. I'm asking because I'm tired of being afraid. I'm asking because Emma was right. I've spent my whole life choosing my reputation over the people who actually matter. I'm asking because you saved my life, and maybe it's time I return the favor by not letting you disappear again. Grace's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. In that case, Mr. Rhodes, I'd be honored to stand with you. Harry felt something shift in his chest. Not the dangerous tightness of a heart attack, but the expansion of possibility, of courage, of hope. He pressed the intercom button. Patricia, please tell the board that Ms. Washington and I will be joining them shortly. And Patricia, cancel my appointments for the rest of the week. I have some reporters to talk to. Grace squeezed his hands. You sure about this? Harry thought about his daughter, about his late wife, about the man he'd been in that alley, and the man he was choosing to become. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Together, they walked toward the elevator that would carry them to whatever came next. They were still holding hands. 6 months later, Grace Washington stood at the podium of the National Corporate Wellness Conference, looking out at an audience of CEOs, HR directors, and business leaders who had once seen people like her as statistics rather than human beings. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman who'd once been invisible was now being asked to make others visible. When we talk about employee wellness, she began, her voice carrying easily through the packed auditorium, we often focus on gym memberships and health screenings. But what if I told you that the most powerful wellness tool in your toolkit costs nothing and can be implemented immediately? She clicked to her next slide. A photo of Harry in that hospital bed 6 months ago, looking grey and defeated. Recognition. Not of achievements or performance metrics, but of humanity. The recognition that the person sitting in the cubicle next to you has a story, struggles, dreams that matter as much as their quarterly numbers. In the front row, Harry watched her with the pride of someone witnessing a miracle in real time. The Grace at this podium bore little resemblance to the woman in the donated coat who'd knelt beside him in that alley, though the kindness in her eyes remained unchanged. She wore a sharp business suit now, one she'd insisted on buying with her own paycheck, not his money, and spoke with the authority of someone who'd earned every word through lived experience. At Rhodes Enterprises, Grace continued, we've reduced stress-related sick days by 40%, increased employee satisfaction by 60%, and prevented an estimated 12 stress-induced medical emergencies in the past 6 months. How? By implementing what we call radical recognition, the practice of seeing every employee as a complete human being worthy of dignity, respect, and genuine care. The audience was leaning forward now, taking notes. Grace had become something of a phenomenon in corporate wellness circles. The formerly homeless woman, whose innovative approaches to employee care were revolutionizing workplace culture. Harvard Business School had already asked her to guest lecture. 3 major corporations had tried to poach her with 7-figure offers. She'd turned them all down. But the most important transformation, Grace said, her eyes finding Harry's in the crowd, wasn't in our metrics or our bottom line. It was in our leadership. Because when those at the top choose vulnerability over invincibility, authenticity over image management, the entire culture shifts. The presentation ended to thunderous applause. As Grace stepped down from the podium, she was immediately surrounded by business leaders asking questions, exchanging cards, wanting to know how they could implement her programs. But her eyes stayed on Harry, who was making his way through the crowd toward her. "Ms. Washington, incredible presentation," gushed a woman in an expensive suit. "I'm the VP of Human Resources at Meridian Corp, and we'd love to discuss bringing you in as a consultant." "Thank you," Grace said politely, "but I'm very happy where I am." Harry finally reached her side, and the crowd around them seemed to sense something and gave them space. He looked different too, healthier, more present. The lines of stress around his eyes had softened, replaced by something that looked like contentment. "How'd I do?" Grace asked. "You were magnificent," Harry said, and meant it. "Catherine would have loved you." It was the first time he'd mentioned his late wife in the context of Grace, and Grace understood the weight of that statement. She squeezed his arm gently. "She loved you, Harry. That means she wanted you to be happy, to be whole." They walked together toward the hotel lobby, where the conference reception was being held. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Grace could see the city where everything had changed for both of them. 6 months ago, she'd been sleeping in shelters and searching through dumpsters. Now she was being courted by Fortune 500 companies and featured on magazine covers. But the real transformation was quieter, more personal. It was in the way Harry had restructured his entire schedule to prioritize time over productivity. It was in the calls from Emma, who'd started saying Dad again instead of Harry. It was in the Employee Wellness Center that now occupied an entire floor of the Rhodes building, where workers could access not just physical health care, but mental health support, financial counseling, and childcare assistance. "Grace," Harry said as they paused near the windows, "I need to tell you something." "What?" He looked nervous suddenly, like a teenager asking someone to prom. "Emma's coming to visit next week. She wants to meet you officially." "I'd love to meet her officially," Grace said, smiling. "Though I suspect she already knows everything about me from your phone calls." Harry laughed. "She may have mentioned that I talk about you a lot. Good things, I hope. The best things." Harry's expression grew serious. "Grace, these past 6 months have been... I don't know how to describe what you've given me. I haven't given you anything you didn't already have, Harry. I just helped you remember where you put it." They were interrupted by the approach of a young reporter, tablet in hand and camera crew in tow. Grace recognized her. Janet Martinez from Business Week, one of the few journalists who'd covered their story fairly from the beginning. "Mr. Rhodes, Ms. Washington, could I get a quick interview? Our readers are fascinated by your partnership and what it's meant for corporate America." Harry looked at Grace, who nodded. They'd learned to navigate the media attention together, turning what had started as a scandal into a platform for change. "Of course," Harry said. "The question everyone's asking," Janet began, "is whether this partnership will continue to evolve. There are rumors about expansion, maybe taking your wellness model national." Grace and Harry exchanged glances. They'd been discussing this very possibility, not just as business partners, but as something more. The attraction between them had been building slowly, carefully, both of them aware of the complicated dynamics of their situation. "We're exploring several opportunities," Grace said diplomatically. "The important thing is that we continue to prioritize authentic human connection over profit margins." "And personally?" Janet pressed gently. "You two have obviously developed a close working relationship. Is there potential for something more?" Harry felt his cheeks warm. 6 months ago, he would have deflected, given some corporate non-answer. But Grace had taught him that authenticity was a choice, and he was tired of hiding from his own life. "Grace saved my life in more ways than one," he said, looking directly at her as he spoke. "She's brilliant, compassionate, and the strongest person I've ever met. If she'll have me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life learning from her." Grace's eyes widened slightly. This wasn't quite a proposal, but it was close. And it was happening on camera, in front of a reporter, with no corporate filter or careful planning. It was perfectly, authentically Harry. "Well," Grace said, her voice warm with emotion, "I guess that depends on whether you're asking as my boss or as Harry. I'm asking as the man whose life you saved in an alley 6 months ago. The man who's been falling in love with you one conversation at a time." The camera kept rolling, but neither of them cared anymore. Grace stepped closer to Harry, close enough to see her own reflection in his eyes. "In that case," she said, "yes. To all of it. The partnership, the expansion, the learning from each other. All of it." Harry's smile could have powered the city. He took her hands, the same way he had in her small office months ago, but this time with the confidence of someone who'd chosen love over fear. "Grace Washington," he said softly, "will you marry me?" The question surprised even him. He hadn't planned to propose, certainly not here, certainly not now. But looking at her in this moment, surrounded by the life they'd built together from nothing, it felt like the only possible next step. Grace laughed, tears streaming down her face. "Harry Rhodes, are you proposing to me at a business conference?" "I'm proposing to you wherever you'll say yes." "Then yes," she said, throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes to all of it. Yes to the proposal. Yes to the life. Yes to staying with you for as long as you'll have me." As they kissed, the reporter smiled and quietly signaled her camera crew to stop filming. Some moments were too precious for public consumption. Later, as the reception wound down and they walked hand in hand through the city streets, Grace pointed to an alley between 2 buildings. Not the one where they'd met, but similar enough to trigger memories. "Funny how things work out," she said. "What do you mean?" "6 months ago, I was looking through dumpsters for aluminum cans. Tonight, I'm engaged to a billionaire and being courted by Harvard Business School. If someone had told me this would happen, would you have believed them?" Grace considered this. "No, but maybe that's the point. Maybe the best things in life are the ones we can't imagine until they're happening to us." Harry squeezed her hand. "Grace." "Yeah. Thank you for staying. In the alley, at the company in my life. Thank you for staying." Grace stopped walking and pulled him into another kiss, right there on the sidewalk under the streetlights. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "Thank you for asking me to," she whispered. Above them, the city sparkled with possibility. Behind them lay months of transformation, growth, and the slow building of something beautiful from something broken. Ahead lay a future neither of them could fully imagine, but both were eager to discover together. They were no longer the desperate man in the alley, or the invisible woman with the donated coat. They were Harry and Grace, partners in business and life. Proof that sometimes the universe puts exactly the right person in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to stay, if you're brave enough to ask someone else to stay, Miracles happen in the most unexpected ways. As they walked toward home, their home now, the apartment they'd chosen together, filled with plants and laughter and the quiet contentment of two people who'd found their way to each other across impossible odds. Grace thought about the cross pendant still hanging around her neck, the one her mother had given her years ago. "Keep moving, Gracie," her mother used to say. "Keep breathing. Tomorrow might be different." Tomorrow had turned out to be more different than either of them could have imagined. And it was perfect.